The knife slipped from Elena Marchetti's hand and clattered onto the marble counter, and for one full second, the entire kitchen went silent. 12 chefs froze. A waiter carrying a tray of glasses stopped mid-step. Everyone was staring at the man who had just walked through the service door without an invitation, without a name tag, without anyone daring to stop him. He was tall, dressed in a dark gray suit that looked like it cost more than the restaurant's monthly rent, and his eyes moved across the room the way a man checks a place for exits. Elena did not know his name yet. She only knew that something about the way people shrank back from him told her he was not a guest who wandered in by mistake. "Who is in charge of tonight's food?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more unsettling than shouting would have been. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "I am," she said. "Elena Marchetti. Is there a problem?" He studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made her want to fold her arms across her chest, though she refused to give him the satisfaction. "No problem," he said finally. "I wanted to meet the person responsible for the best meal I have eaten in 3 years." The tension in the room did not disappear, but it shifted. A few of the younger cooks exchanged glances. One of the servers, an older woman named Marie who had worked private events for a decade, looked at Elena and gave the smallest shake of her head, a silent warning that Elena did not understand yet but would remember later. "Thank you," Elena said carefully. "May I ask who you are?" "Dante Rossi," he said, as if the name should mean something. It did not mean anything to Elena that night. She had spent the last 2 years building a small catering business from nothing, working 18-hour days, taking every job that came her way because rent did not pay itself, and her culinary school loans were not going anywhere. She had taken this event through an agency, a private dinner for 20 guests in a rented mansion outside the city. Nobody had told her whose house it actually was. "Well, Mr. Rossi, I am glad you enjoyed the food," she said, already turning back toward her station, where a sauce was in danger of burning if she did not attend to it immediately. "Dante," he corrected. "Not Mr. Rossi, just Dante." Something in his tone made her pause, just for a second, before she caught herself and kept walking. Behind her, she heard him laugh quietly, as if her lack of interest amused him more than flattery ever could. She did not think about him again until the following week, when the same agency called her with another private job, this time paying nearly double her usual rate for a much smaller group. When she arrived at the address, she recognized the house immediately, and her stomach tightened. He was there again, standing near the window with a glass of wine he was not drinking, watching her walk in with her boxes of ingredients like she was the only interesting thing in the room. This time, 3 men stood near the entrance, quiet, watchful, dressed the way bodyguards dress when they want you to notice they are armed without ever showing you a weapon. "You again," Elena said, setting her boxes down on the counter of the enormous kitchen. "Me again," Dante agreed. "I requested you specifically." "I gathered that. Does it bother you?" Elena considered lying, considered telling him it did not matter to her either way, but something about his directness pulled the same honesty out of her. "A little," she admitted. "I don't usually know who I'm cooking for. I like it that way. And now you know." "Now I know your name. I don't actually know who you are." Dante's expression flickered, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before the calm returned. "Most people in this city know exactly who I am," he said. "It is refreshing to meet someone who does not." "Maybe I just don't follow the news," Elena said, pulling out her knives and beginning to unpack her ingredients, refusing to let the conversation slow her down. She had a dinner to prepare, and whatever games this man wanted to play, she had bills to pay and a business to build. He watched her work for nearly 20 minutes without saying another word, which should have made her uncomfortable, and did, but not in the way she expected. There was something in the quiet way he observed her, an attention that felt different from the usual stares she got from men who wanted something obvious from her. He seemed to actually be watching how she moved, how she chose her ingredients, how she tasted a sauce and adjusted it without hesitation. "You love this," he said eventually. It was not a question. "I do," Elena said, surprised by how easily the truth came out. "Cooking is the only thing that ever made sense to me." "That is rare," Dante said. "Most people I meet want something. Money, protection, a favor. You just want to make good food. Should I want something else?" "No," he said, and for the first time, something like a real smile crossed his face. "Do not change." That night, after the guests had eaten and left, and the kitchen was clean, Dante walked her to her car himself, waving off one of his men who moved to do it instead. The night air was cool, and the mansion's long driveway was lit by soft lamps on either side, throwing long shadows across the gravel. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, stopping beside her old car, which looked embarrassingly small parked in front of the mansion's grand entrance. "Of course." "Why does everyone act so careful around you? The servers, your own men, even the other guests tonight. Nobody looks you directly in the eye." Dante was quiet for a moment, and Elena thought he might avoid the question entirely. "Because they are afraid of me," he said finally. "And they should be. I am not always a good man, Elena. I have done things that would frighten you if you knew them." She should have felt a chill at those words. She should have gotten into her car and driven away and never taken another job connected to this family again. Instead, she found herself studying his face, searching for the cruelty he was describing and finding, instead, a tiredness that looked almost human. "Are you trying to scare me away?" she asked. "Maybe I am trying to warn you," he said. "Some things are better left alone." "Then why did you request me again?" He did not have an answer for that, or if he did, he chose not to share it. Instead, he opened her car door for her, an old-fashioned gesture that felt strange coming from a man his men clearly feared, and waited until she was safely inside before stepping back. "Good night, Elena," he said. She drove home with the windows down, telling herself the whole way that this was nothing, that a wealthy client had simply taken an interest in her cooking, that there was no reason for her heart to still be racing the way it was. But 2 days later, another call came, another job, another absurd amount of money for a dinner that grew smaller each time, until it was just the two of them and a single guard stationed outside the door. And Elena, despite every warning bell ringing in the back of her mind, found herself putting on her best apron and driving back toward that mansion anyway, unable to explain even to herself why she kept saying yes. What she did not know yet, what she could not have known standing in that kitchen with flour on her hands and a strange, dangerous man watching her every move, was that her own family had a history with the Rossi name, a history buried so deep in her past that she had almost convinced herself it did not exist anymore. A brother she had not seen in 6 years, a debt that was never repaid, a silence that had never been explained. She was walking straight into the one house in the city she should have run from, and she had no idea yet how far the fall was going to be. Dante, for his part, knew something Elena did not. He had recognized her last name the very first night, the moment the agency sent over her information before the event. Marchetti was not a common name in his world, but it was not one he had forgotten either. He had chosen not to say anything. He told himself it was because the past was the past, because business was business, because a coincidence like this one meant nothing. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. Every rule he had built his life around told him to stay away from her. Every instinct that had kept him alive for 15 years, in a world that did not forgive weakness, told him that pursuing Elena Marchetti was the most reckless thing he could do. And yet, standing at that window each time she arrived, watching her climb out of her small, tired car with her boxes of ingredients and her fierce, unbothered confidence, he found himself waiting for her, the way he had not waited for anything in a very long time. She was off limits in every way that mattered, and still, he could not stop thinking about her. 3 weeks passed, and Elena told herself each time that the next job would be the last one. She would take Dante Rossi's money, finish the meal, and walk away without looking back. 3 weeks passed, and each time, she found a new reason to stay a little longer, to answer one more question, to let the conversation stretch past the point where professionalism should have ended. It started small. He would ask about her recipes, where she learned to cook, why she chose the dishes she chose. She found herself telling him about her grandmother's kitchen in a small town 2 hours outside the city, about the summer she spent working in a restaurant in Lyon before her money ran out, about the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates who never did the dishes. He listened in a way that made her feel like the only person in the room, which was strange, considering how often his men hovered nearby, watching everything, saying nothing. He never asked her to come to the mansion socially. Every visit still had the shape of a job, a dinner to prepare, an invoice to send, but the dinners grew smaller and smaller, until eventually it was clear there were no other guests coming at all, and Elena stopped pretending she did not know what that meant. "You could just invite me to dinner," she said one evening, setting down a plate in front of him at the long dining table, where he now insisted on eating alone with her, instead of in the separate dining room, instead of hiring me to cook it. Dante looked up at her, something like amusement flickering across his face. Would you have said yes? I don't know, Elena admitted. Probably not, but at least it would have been honest. This is honest, he said. I like your food. I like talking to you. If I asked you to dinner as something else, you would say no because of who I am. This way, you keep saying yes. That's manipulative. It's effective, he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a way that made it very hard for Elena to stay annoyed with him. She sat down across from him without being asked, something she never would have dared to do the first week, and picked at her own plate while he ate. Outside, the evening light was fading over the gardens, painting everything gold and orange, and for a moment, it was easy to forget who he was and what his men were guarding against. Can I ask you something? Dante said, echoing her own question from weeks earlier. Go ahead. Marchetti. It's not a common name. Do you have family in the city? Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. It was such a simple question, asked so casually, that she almost did not notice the way his eyes had sharpened, watching her reaction closely. Not anymore, she said carefully. My parents passed a few years ago. I have a brother, but we haven't spoken in a long time. Why not? It's complicated, Elena said, and something in her voice must have told him not to push further, because he let the subject drop, though she noticed he did not look away from her for a long moment afterward, as if he were turning something over in his mind that he had not expected to find there. She did not think much of it that night. It was only later, weeks later, that she would understand what that flicker of recognition had meant, and by then, it would be far too late to protect her heart from what was coming. Dante's world was not built for softness, and he knew it better than anyone. He had grown up watching his father run the family business with an iron discipline that left no room for sentiment, and he had learned early that weakness, real or perceived, could be fatal. By the time he took control of the organization at 28, after his father's sudden death, he had already built walls around himself so thick that even his closest allies rarely saw past them. Vincent Caruso, his oldest friend and closest advisor, was one of the few people who had known him long enough to notice when something had changed. He noticed it the week after Elena's first visit, in the way Dante lingered near windows in the evening, the way he asked the kitchen staff unnecessary questions about upcoming events, the way his mood shifted from sharp and businesslike to something quieter and more distracted whenever her name came up. You know this is dangerous, Vincent said one afternoon, finding Dante in his study, staring at nothing in particular, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. I know, Dante said. The Conti family is already looking for any weakness they can use against us. If they find out you have taken an interest in a woman with no connections, no protection, nothing to defend her, they will not hesitate to use her against you. I know that too. Then why continue? Dante did not have a good answer, not one that would satisfy Vincent's careful, practical mind. How could he explain that for the first time in years, he looked forward to something that had nothing to do with power or money or survival? How could he explain that Elena Marchetti, with her fierce independence and her refusal to be intimidated by anything he represented, made him feel like the man he might have been if his life had gone differently? I will be careful, Dante said instead, which was the closest thing to an honest answer he could offer. Vincent studied him for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but he did not push further. He had known Dante long enough to understand that once his friend made up his mind about something, arguing rarely changed the outcome. Instead, he made a mental note to keep a closer watch on the situation, to quietly ensure that no word of this growing attachment reached the wrong ears before Dante himself had decided what to do about it. For Elena, the weeks that followed brought a strange and unfamiliar happiness, one she found herself both embracing and distrusting in equal measure. Her business had grown steadily thanks to the Rossi family's generous payments and the word of mouth that came from cooking for wealthy, influential guests. She had hired 2 additional cooks, moved into a slightly larger apartment, and for the first time in years, did not lie awake at night calculating whether she could afford next month's rent. And yet, none of that explained the way her chest tightened every time her phone rang with an unknown number, hoping it might be him. None of it explained the hours she spent, against her own better judgment, thinking about the way he had looked at her across that dining table, like she was something rare and unexpected in a world that had stopped surprising him long ago. Her friend Olivia, who ran a small flower shop 2 streets over from Elena's apartment and had known her since culinary school, was the first person to notice the change. "You're glowing," Olivia said one Sunday afternoon, watching Elena arrange a bouquet of white roses with unusual care. "It's disgusting. Who is he?" "There's no one," Elena said, too quickly. "Elena, I have known you for 8 years. You have never once glowed over a man in your life. Tell me his name." Elena hesitated, weighing how much to share, before finally admitting, "His name is Dante. I've been cooking for him. It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Olivia said, setting down her own flowers to give Elena her full attention. "Dante who?" "Rossi." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Olivia's face went pale, her earlier teasing tone vanishing completely. "Elena, please tell me you are joking." "Why? What's wrong?" "You don't know who that is?" Olivia's voice dropped, even though they were alone in the shop. "Elena, that family runs half the illegal business in this city. Everyone knows it. The police know it. Nobody can ever prove anything, because anyone who tries to prove something disappears. You are telling me you have been alone in a house with him, multiple times, and you had no idea?" Elena's stomach turned cold. She had suspected, of course, that Dante's world was dangerous, that the careful, watchful men who guarded his home were not simply wealthy security staff, but hearing it said so plainly, by someone she trusted completely, made the reality impossible to ignore any longer. "I didn't know," Elena admitted quietly. "Not the details." "You need to stop," Olivia said, gripping Elena's hand across the counter. "Whatever this is, whatever you think is happening between you, you need to walk away before it becomes something you cannot walk away from." Elena wanted to agree. She wanted to promise Olivia that she would decline the next job, that she would let her assistant cooks handle any future events at the Rossi mansion, that she would put this strange, dangerous fascination behind her before it grew into something she could not control. Instead, when her phone rang 2 days later and Dante's driver asked if she was available for a dinner that Friday, she found herself saying yes before she had fully decided to. She told herself it was the money. She told herself it was professional obligation, that turning down a client without explanation would be bad for business. She told herself a dozen small lies on the drive to the mansion that Friday evening, and every single one of them evaporated the moment Dante opened the door himself instead of letting his staff answer it, his expression softening into something warm and genuine the second he saw her. "You came," he said, as if he had genuinely doubted she would. "I said I would. I wasn't sure you still would, after everything." Elena's breath caught slightly. "What do you mean, after everything?" Dante studied her face for a long moment, and she wondered if he somehow knew about her conversation with Olivia, if he could read the hesitation that had been building in her all week. "I mean the kind of man I am," he said finally. "It's not a secret, Elena, even if I never said it directly. I thought you might have finally figured it out and decided to stay away." "Maybe I should have," Elena said honestly. "But you didn't." "No," she admitted, "I didn't." They stood there in the doorway for a long moment, the evening air cool around them, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them like a held breath. Finally, Dante stepped aside to let her in, and as she passed him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, she understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that this was no longer just a job. Somewhere along the way, without ever fully deciding to, she had let herself fall into something she had no idea how to escape. That evening, over a dinner she barely tasted despite having cooked it herself, Dante told her more about himself than he ever had before. Not the details of his business, not the things Vincent had warned him never to share with anyone outside the family, but smaller truths, the kind that mattered more in the end. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was young, about the loneliness of growing up in a house built entirely around power and fear, about the exhaustion of never being able to trust that anyone wanted him for himself, rather than what he could offer them. "Is that what this is?" Elena asked quietly, watching him across the table. "You think I want something from you?" "No," Dante said, and for the first time, his voice carried none of its usual careful control. "That's exactly why I can't stop thinking about you. You are the first person in years who has never once asked me for anything." Elena did not know what to say to that. She only knew, sitting there in the golden evening light, watching the walls around this dangerous, complicated man slowly begin to come down, that she was already far too invested to walk away, no matter how many warnings Olivia gave her, no matter how many reasons her own good sense provided. She was falling, slowly and completely, for a man whose world could destroy her without warning, and somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and the caution, she was no longer entirely sure she wanted to stop. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Elena's apartment door sometime before dawn, with no return address and no explanation. Inside was a single photograph, old and slightly faded, showing a young man standing beside a car that Elena recognized instantly. Her brother, Luca, looking barely 20 years old, standing next to a black sedan she had seen parked outside the Rossi mansion more times than she could count. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting she did not recognize, were 3 words: "Ask him yourself." Elena sat on the edge of her bed for nearly an hour, staring at the photograph, her mind racing through possibilities that all led back to the same impossible question. Why did her brother, who had vanished from her life 6 years ago without explanation, have any connection to Dante's world at all? She had not seen Luca since she was 22 years old. He had left one night without warning, taking almost nothing with him, leaving behind only a short note that said he needed to handle something and would explain later. The explanation never came. Their parents had searched for him for months before eventually accepting that he did not want to be found. Elena had grieved his absence the way she might have grieved a death, except worse, because there was no funeral, no closure, only an endless, unanswered question that she had eventually stopped asking out loud. She did not go to the mansion that week. When Dante's driver called to arrange the next dinner, she made an excuse about a prior commitment, buying herself time to think, to decide how to approach the impossible thing sitting in her hands. By Thursday, Dante himself called her directly, something he had never done before. His voice carried a note of concern that she might have found touching under different circumstances. "You've been avoiding me," he said, not accusingly, just observing. "I needed some time," Elena said carefully. "Is everything all right?" She almost lied. She almost told him everything was fine, that she was simply busy, that there was nothing worth discussing. But the photograph was sitting on her kitchen counter, and she could not look at it without feeling the question burning in her chest, demanding an answer she was terrified to hear. "Do you know someone named Luca Marchetti?" she asked instead. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Elena's stomach dropped before he even answered. "Where did you hear that name?" Dante asked finally, his voice suddenly guarded in a way she had never heard from him before. "He's my brother," Elena said. "Dante, please, just tell me the truth. Someone left a photograph at my door. My brother, standing next to a car I've seen at your house. I need to know what happened to him." "Elena, this is not a conversation to have over the phone. Come to the house. Tonight. I will explain everything I can. Everything you can, or everything that's true." "Elena," his voice had an edge of pleading in it now, something she had never heard from him. "Please, come tonight." She almost refused. Every instinct told her to stay far away from that mansion, from the man who had clearly been keeping something enormous from her since the very first night they met. But the need to know, the years of unanswered questions about her brother, pulled harder than any warning could. She arrived that evening to find the mansion unusually quiet, most of the staff dismissed for the night, only Vincent and one other guard remaining near the entrance. Dante met her at the door himself, his expression tight with something that looked almost like guilt. "Sit down," he said, leading her into his study, a room she had never been inside before, lined with books and framed photographs that told the story of a family history she knew nothing about. Elena did not sit. "Tell me about my brother." Dante rubbed a hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion that made him look, for the first time, less like the untouchable man everyone feared, and more like someone carrying a weight he had never wanted. "Luca worked for my father," he said finally. "Nearly 7 years ago. He was young, ambitious, looking to make fast money to help his family. He did not fully understand what he was getting into." Elena's hands were shaking now, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "Go on." "There was a job that went wrong. Luca was involved in moving something for the organization, and a rival family intercepted the shipment. Things escalated. People were hurt. Luca panicked and disappeared before my father could bring him back safely, believing, wrongly, that my family would blame him and come after him. Is he alive?" Elena's voice cracked on the question. all the composure she had been holding on to finally breaking. "Yes," Dante said quickly, seeing the fear in her eyes. "He is alive. My father, and later I, kept track of him over the years, made sure he was safe from a distance, even though he never knew it. He changed his name. He built a quiet life for himself in another city. He never wanted to be found, Elena, not even by you. He was terrified that reaching out would put you and your parents in danger." Elena sank into the chair across from Dante's desk, the room spinning slightly around her. 6 years of grief, of unanswered questions, of quietly believing her brother had simply stopped caring about his family, and the truth was so much more complicated than she had ever imagined. "Why didn't you tell me this the first night we met?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew my name. You must have known immediately who I was." "I did," Dante admitted, "and I told myself it did not matter, that it was ancient history, that there was no reason to bring up something so painful when it had nothing to do with why I wanted to know you." "Nothing to do with it?" Elena's voice rose now, anger finally breaking through the shock. "Dante, my brother disappeared because of your family's business. You have known this entire time exactly who I was and exactly what happened, and you let me sit at your table, let me fall for you, without ever once telling me the truth." "I know," Dante said quietly. "I know, and I am not going to pretend I made the right choice. I was selfish. I did not want to lose whatever this is between us before it had a chance to become something real." Elena stood up, pacing the length of the study, trying to process everything at once. Her brother was alive. Her brother had been alive this entire time, living somewhere with a new name, terrified to reach out, while she had spent years believing he simply did not want her in his life anymore. And the man responsible for keeping that secret, however carefully, was the same man she had allowed herself to fall for despite every warning. "I want to see him," she said finally. "I want to talk to him myself." "That is dangerous, Elena. The people who caused the trouble 7 years ago are still active. If word gets out that Luca is alive and where he is, it could put him at risk all over again." "I don't care about the danger," Elena said. "I have spent 6 years grieving a brother who is somehow alive. You do not get to keep that from me any longer." Dante studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing something carefully behind his eyes, some calculation between protecting his family's secrets and giving her the truth she deserved. Finally, he nodded, slowly. "I will arrange it," he said. "Carefully. It will take time to do this safely, but I promise you, Elena, I will make it happen." It was not enough to undo the anger and hurt sitting heavy in her chest, but it was something, a first step toward the honesty that should have existed between them from the very beginning. Elena left the mansion that night without saying goodbye, without any of the warmth that had grown between them over the previous weeks, and Dante let her go, understanding that pushing further would only make things worse. What neither of them knew that night was that the envelope containing the photograph had not been sent by accident, and it had not been sent as a kindness. Salvatore Conti, the head of the rival family that had caused the original trouble 7 years earlier, had been watching Dante's growing attachment to Elena for weeks, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to use it against him. Salvatore had learned of Elena's identity through a careless conversation between 2 of Dante's junior associates, men who did not yet understand the importance of discretion when it came to their boss's personal life. Once he discovered the connection to Luca Marchetti, a loose end from an old conflict that had never been fully resolved, the opportunity was too perfect to ignore. He had sent the photograph not to help Elena, but to create exactly the kind of chaos and mistrust that was now unfolding inside the Rossi household. A distracted, emotionally compromised Dante Rossi was a vulnerable one, and Salvatore intended to use that vulnerability to his full advantage in the weeks ahead. Vincent, watching the situation unfold from the shadows of the mansion's hallway, understood immediately what was happening, even if Dante, consumed by guilt and worry over Elena, had not yet connected the pieces. "This was not a coincidence," Vincent said, finding Dante alone in his study late that night, staring at the empty chair where Elena had been sitting hours earlier. "Someone wanted her to know about Luca. Someone wanted this exact reaction from you." "Conti," Dante said quietly, the realization settling over him like a weight. "It has his signature all over it," Vincent agreed. "He is testing you, Dante, watching to see how far you will go to protect this woman, how much you are willing to expose to keep her close. If he sees weakness, he will not hesitate to use it." Dante closed his eyes, understanding with sudden clarity how badly he had underestimated the danger of letting Elena into his life. It was not simply a matter of family rules or old-fashioned tradition anymore. Her connection to Luca, combined with her connection to him, had made her a target in a much larger conflict than either of them had realized. "I need to protect her," Dante said, more to himself than to Vincent. "Then you need to decide how far you are willing to go to do it," Vincent replied. Because Conti will not stop with a photograph, this was only the beginning. Outside, the night had grown quiet and still, the kind of stillness that felt less like peace and more like the calm before something far more dangerous began to unfold. Elena drove home with her mind spinning between grief and anger and a fragile, unexpected hope that she might finally see her brother again after all these years. She had no idea that her presence in Dante's life had already made her a target, or that the danger circling both of them was about to become far more real than either of them could have imagined. 2 weeks passed before Elena heard from Dante again, and in that time she threw herself into work, taking on every catering job she could manage, trying to fill the silence with something other than thoughts of him. Olivia noticed the change immediately, the tired shadows under Elena's eyes, the way she flinched whenever her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "You look worse than before," Olivia said one evening, dropping by Elena's apartment with a bottle of wine and an expression of genuine concern. "Did something happen?" Elena told her everything then. The photograph, the truth about Luca, the anger she still could not quite let go of, and underneath it all, the ache of missing Dante despite every reason she had to stay away. Olivia listened without interrupting, her earlier warnings replaced now with a quiet sympathy that Elena appreciated more than she could say. "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked when Elena finished. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away completely. Part of me can't stop thinking about seeing my brother again. And somewhere underneath all of that, I still think about him, about Dante, which makes no sense considering everything." "It makes perfect sense," Olivia said gently. "You don't fall out of love with someone just because they made a mistake. The question is whether he's worth the risk." Elena did not have an answer for that yet. She was still turning the question over in her mind 3 days later when a black car pulled up outside her apartment building, and Vincent Caruso, a man she had met only briefly during her visits to the mansion, stepped out and approached her front door with an urgency that immediately set her on edge. "Elena, I need you to come with me," Vincent said, his voice tight and controlled in a way that made her stomach drop. "What's happened?" "It's about your brother. There's been a situation. Dante needs to speak with you immediately, and it isn't safe to discuss over the phone." The drive to the mansion felt longer than usual, Vincent's silence heavy with things he clearly was not going to explain until Dante did it himself. When they arrived, Dante was waiting in the entrance hall, and the moment Elena saw his face, pale and drawn with worry, she knew whatever had happened was serious. "Tell me," she said, not bothering with greetings. "Salvatore Conti knows about Luca," Dante said. "He knows where he is living, what name he is using now. He sent the original photograph to you, specifically to provoke this exact situation, to see how I would react, to test what I would risk to protect you and, by extension, your brother." Elena's blood ran cold. "Is Luca safe?" "For now," Dante said. "I have people watching him, people I trust completely. But Conti is not simply threatening him to cause trouble for old reasons. He wants something from me, and he is using both you and your brother as leverage to get it." "What does he want?" Dante hesitated, and Elena could see him weighing how much to tell her, an old habit she recognized now and resented deeply. "There is territory," he said finally. "Business interests that Conti has wanted for years, that my family has always refused to give up. He believes that with the right pressure, I will finally agree to hand over control of certain operations to avoid losing people I care about." "And will you?" Elena asked quietly. "I don't know," Dante admitted, and the honesty in his voice, the visible struggle on his face, told her more than any promise could have. "Elena, I need you to understand something. The moment Conti realized you meant something to me, you stopped being simply someone I cared about and became a target. I should have protected you from that the moment I understood the risk. Instead, I let my own selfishness put you directly in danger." Elena wanted to be angry at him again, wanted to hold on to the resentment that had kept her distant these past 2 weeks, but standing there in the entrance hall, watching him carry the weight of a danger he had created. If not intentionally, she found that anger was not the only thing she felt anymore. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, you stay here, where it is safe, until we can resolve this," Dante said. "I know it is not what you want to hear. I know it feels like a cage. But Conti's people know where you live, Elena. They know your daily routine, your business, everything about your life. Here, at least, I can guarantee your safety." Elena thought of her small apartment, her growing business, the independence she had built so carefully over the years, and the idea of giving all of that up, even temporarily, made her chest tighten with resistance. But she thought too of Luca, finally within reach after 6 long years, and the danger that now threatened him because of a connection neither of them had chosen. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay. But I want updates, Dante. I want to know everything that's happening, not just what you decide I'm ready to hear." "Agreed," Dante said, relief evident in his voice. The following days passed in a strange, tense rhythm, Elena adjusting to life inside the mansion's walls, surrounded by guards and staff who treated her with a wary respect she had not expected. Dante was frequently absent, locked in meetings with Vincent and other members of his organization, working to untangle the growing conflict with Conti's family before it escalated further. It was during one of these quiet evenings, while Dante was away handling business Elena was not permitted to know the details of, that she first noticed something strange about one of the household staff, a young man named Felix who had been assigned to bring meals to her room and check on her needs during the day. He was polite, efficient, entirely unremarkable except for the way his eyes lingered a moment too long on the security cameras positioned throughout the hallways, the way he seemed to memorize the guards' rotation schedules with more attention than his job required. Elena mentioned it to Vincent almost as an afterthought one afternoon, not fully understanding the significance of what she had noticed. Vincent's reaction told her immediately that her instincts had been correct. "How long has Felix worked here?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully neutral in a way that did not match the sudden alertness in his eyes. "I don't know. He's been bringing my meals since I arrived." Vincent excused himself immediately, and within the hour, the mansion was quietly, efficiently searched from top to bottom. Felix was found attempting to leave through the service entrance, a small device hidden in his jacket pocket that, when examined by Dante's security team, turned out to be a tracking transmitter, feeding Elena's exact location to someone outside the property every few minutes. Dante returned from his meeting to find the household in controlled chaos, Vincent explaining the situation with grim efficiency. "He's been passing information for at least 2 weeks," Vincent said. "Conti's people got to him somehow. Money, threats, we don't know yet. But he's had access to Elena's schedule, her movements within the house, everything." Dante's expression turned to something colder and more dangerous than Elena had ever seen from him, a controlled fury that made the guards around him visibly tense. "Where is he now?" "Secured," Vincent said. "We'll find out everything he knows." Elena, standing at the top of the stairs, watching this exchange unfold, felt the full weight of the danger she had stepped into finally settle over her. This was not an abstract threat anymore, some distant rival family she had never met. Someone had been inside these walls, watching her, reporting her movements, working to expose the exact vulnerability that Conti wanted to exploit. "Dante," she called down, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to know what this means. For Luca, for me." Dante climbed the stairs to meet her, his expression softening slightly despite the tension still radiating from him. "It means Conti is closer than we realized," he said honestly. "It means we need to move faster to resolve this before he decides that watching is no longer enough." "And if he decides that?" Dante did not answer immediately, and his silence was answer enough. Elena felt fear settle into her chest, sharp and cold, not just for herself but for her brother, living his quiet life somewhere else in the country, unaware that his past had finally caught up to him through a connection he could never have predicted. "I want to talk to Luca," Elena said. "Now. Not after this is resolved. I need him to know what's happening, and I need to know he's safe." Dante nodded slowly. "I'll arrange a call, tonight." The call, when it finally came, was nothing like Elena had imagined during the 6 years she had spent wondering about her brother's fate. Luca's voice, older and rougher than she remembered, cracked with emotion the moment he heard her say his name. "Elena," he said, and she could hear him fighting back tears on the other end of the line. "I am so sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted you to be in danger because of choices I made a long time ago." "I'm not angry at you," Elena said, surprised to find it was true. "I just want to understand. I want to know you're safe." They spoke for nearly an hour, 6 years of silence collapsing into a single conversation, filled with explanations, apologies, and a fragile hope for reconciliation that neither of them dared to name directly. By the time the call ended, Elena felt both lighter and heavier than she had in years. The relief of finally reconnecting with her brother, tangled together with the fear of what danger their reunion might now bring upon them both. Dante, watching from across the room as Elena wiped tears from her eyes after the call ended, felt something shift inside him, a resolve hardening into certainty. He had spent weeks telling himself that his growing feelings for Elena were a complication he could manage carefully, a risk he could control if he was disciplined enough. Watching her now, fragile and strong all at once, he understood that there was no controlling this any longer. He loved her, completely and without reservation, and that love meant he would do whatever was necessary to keep her and her brother safe, regardless of the cost to himself. "I need you to know something," Dante said once Elena had composed herself. "Whatever happens with Conti, whatever it takes, I will not let him hurt you or Luca, even if it means giving him everything he's asking for. Dante, that's your family's business, your legacy. You can't just hand it over because of me." "Watch me," Dante said quietly, and the certainty in his voice left no room for argument. Elena studied his face, searching for any hesitation, any sign that this was simply a promise made in the heat of an emotional moment, and found none. Whatever walls he had built around himself over the years, whatever careful distance he had maintained from vulnerability, had finally come down completely, and standing there in the quiet aftermath of her brother's voice still echoing in her ears, Elena understood that she had fallen in love with a man willing to risk everything for her. The question that remained, hanging heavy in the air between them, was whether that love would be enough to survive whatever Salvatore Conti had planned next. The message arrived 3 days later, delivered not through a phone call or a letter, but through Vincent, who walked into Dante's study, with an expression Elena had learned to recognize as deeply serious. Salvatore Conti had requested a meeting, a formal sit-down between the two families, to be held at a neutral location within the week. "He wants to negotiate directly," Vincent said, "which means he believes he has enough leverage to get what he wants without further games. He's confident, Dante. That should worry us." Dante read through the details of the proposed meeting carefully, his expression unreadable. "He wants us to bring Elena," he said finally, tapping a line near the bottom of the message, "as a condition of the negotiation." Elena, sitting nearby, felt a chill run through her. "Why would he want me there?" "To remind me exactly what is at stake," Dante said grimly, "and to make sure I understand he can reach you whenever he wants, regardless of how many guards surround this house." The days leading up to the meeting were tense in a way that settled into every corner of the mansion, guards doubling their patrols, Vincent and Dante locked in strategy sessions that stretched late into the night. Elena, though technically not part of these discussions, found herself unable to stay away, sitting quietly in the corner of Dante's study as plans were made and discarded. Arguments broke out and were resolved, contingencies built upon contingencies. "I don't like this," Vincent said one evening, after Dante had finally agreed to bring Elena to the meeting as Conti had demanded. "Bringing her directly into a room with him is exactly the kind of risk we should be avoiding, not walking toward." "I know," Dante said, "but refusing gives him exactly the excuse he needs to escalate further. If we show up together, controlled, prepared, it demonstrates that neither of us can be intimidated. If we refuse, it shows weakness, and weakness is the one thing Conti understands how to exploit." Elena, listening from her corner of the room, finally spoke up. "I want to go," she said, surprising both men. "I'm tired of being protected from every decision that affects my own life. If this is going to be resolved, I want to be part of resolving it, not hiding somewhere waiting to hear how it turned out." Dante studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his instinct to shield her from danger and his growing respect for her refusal to be treated as fragile. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay close to me the entire time, and if I tell you to leave, you leave immediately, no argument. Agreed?" "Agreed," Elena said. The meeting took place in a private restaurant that had been cleared of its usual staff and guests for the occasion, a neutral space chosen specifically because both families had agreements not to bring conflict into locations considered off-limits by long-standing tradition. Salvatore Conti was already seated when Dante and Elena arrived, flanked by two of his own men, his expression calm and confident, in a way that immediately put Elena on edge. "Dante," Salvatore said warmly, as if greeting an old friend rather than a rival. "And this must be the famous Elena Marchetti. I have heard so much about your cooking. It's a shame we're meeting under such tense circumstances rather than over one of your meals." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Salvatore," Dante said, taking a seat across the table, Elena settling beside him. "You wanted to negotiate. Let's negotiate." Salvatore's smile did not waver. "Very well. My terms are simple. I want the shipping routes along the Eastern Corridor, the ones your family has controlled for nearly 2 decades. In exchange, I will consider the matter of Luca Marchetti's past involvement fully forgiven, and I will guarantee that neither he nor his sister will face any further difficulty from my organization. Those routes represent nearly a third of my family's income," Dante said evenly. "You're asking for a great deal in exchange for forgiving a debt that should never have existed in the first place. Luca was young, manipulated by circumstances beyond his control. He owes you nothing." "That's a matter of perspective," Salvatore said, "but I am willing to be reasonable. Half the Eastern Corridor, and I consider the matter closed permanently, in writing, witnessed by both our organizations." Elena watched the negotiation unfold with growing tension, understanding for the first time the true scale of what Dante was risking on her behalf. Half of a major income source, a significant blow to his family's business, all to protect her brother and, by extension, her. "I have a counteroffer," Elena said suddenly, surprising everyone at the table, including Dante, who turned to look at her, with an expression somewhere between concern and curiosity. "Elena," Dante said quietly, a warning in his tone. "No. Let me speak," Elena said, holding Salvatore's gaze steadily, despite the fear tightening in her chest. "Mr. Conti, you're asking Dante to give up something valuable for a debt that isn't even his to forgive. My brother made a mistake 7 years ago because he was young and desperate for money. He has spent every year since then living quietly, causing no trouble to anyone, hurting no one. What exactly do you gain from continuing to pursue a grudge against someone who has already paid for his mistake by losing his entire family for 6 years?" Salvatore's expression flickered, a moment of genuine surprise breaking through his composed exterior. "And what would you propose instead, Miss Marchetti?" "A public acknowledgement that the matter is closed, with no exchange of territory," Elena said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "Instead, I will personally cater a dinner for your organization, free of charge, to demonstrate good faith between our families. And Dante's organization will owe your organization one favor of equal value in the future, to be called upon whenever you choose, within reason. No territory changes hands, no one loses something they've spent decades building, but the debt, real or perceived, is considered settled." The table fell silent. Vincent, standing near the door, looked at Elena with something like astonished respect. Dante's expression had shifted entirely, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he watched her hold her ground against a man who had built his reputation on intimidation. Salvatore studied Elena for a long moment, clearly recalculating his approach now that the negotiation had taken an unexpected turn. "You have courage, Miss Marchetti," he said finally, "more than most people who sit across this table from me." "I have a brother I only just got back," Elena said. "I'm not interested in losing him again over territory disputes that have nothing to do with him anymore." Salvatore leaned back in his chair, considering the offer carefully, the calculation behind his eyes visible even to Elena's untrained perspective. Finally, he extended his hand across the table. "One favor, of equal value, to be determined at a future date, and I expect that dinner to be exceptional, Miss Marchetti." "It will be," Elena said, shaking his hand despite the tremor she carefully hid beneath her composed exterior. The meeting concluded shortly after, both parties agreeing to formalize the arrangement through their respective advisors within the coming days. As they left the restaurant, Dante's hand found Elena's, his grip firm and grateful in a way that said more than words could have managed. "You just saved my family a fortune," Dante said quietly once they were alone in the car, Vincent driving them back toward the mansion. "And you did it without giving up an inch of leverage. I did it because I refused to let you sacrifice everything you built because of my family's mistakes," Elena said. "We're even now, Dante. No more secrets. No more decisions made for me instead of with me. If we're going to do this, whatever this is between us, it has to be as equals. Dante turned to face her fully, something raw and unguarded in his expression that she had never seen from him before, not even in their most private moments together. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since that first night in the kitchen, when you looked at me like I was just a man instead of something to be feared. I should have told you the truth about Luca from the beginning. I should have trusted you with everything from the start. I am asking you now, if you'll let me, to spend the rest of my life making up for that mistake." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes, 6 years of grief and weeks of fear and uncertainty finally settling into something that felt, for the first time, like genuine peace. "I love you too," she said. "Even when I was furious with you, even when I told myself I should walk away, I never stopped loving you." The weeks that followed brought a slow, careful rebuilding of trust between them, Dante including Elena in decisions that affected both their lives, Luca finally reuniting with his sister in person for the first time in 6 years, a tearful, healing reunion that neither of them had believed possible only a month earlier. Salvatore Conti, true to his word, never raised the matter of old debts again. The fragile peace between the two families holding steady, strengthened rather than weakened by the resolution Elena had negotiated. Vincent, watching Dante transform in the months that followed, found himself admitting privately that he had been wrong to worry so deeply about Elena's presence in Dante's life. Rather than making him vulnerable, she had made him stronger, sharper, more thoughtful in his decisions. A leader who finally understood that strength did not require the absence of love, but could instead be built upon it. Elena's catering business flourished beyond anything she had imagined, her reputation growing not just among Dante's world but throughout the city, as clients sought out the woman known for both her extraordinary cooking and her quiet, unshakable courage. She kept her independence, her own apartment, her own growing team of chefs, refusing to let her relationship with Dante define her entirely, even as their lives grew more deeply intertwined with each passing month. On a quiet evening nearly a year after that first fateful dinner in the mansion's kitchen, Dante found Elena exactly where he always found her when he wanted to watch her at her happiest, standing at a stove, completely absorbed in the careful, precise work of creating something extraordinary from simple ingredients. He watched her for a long moment from the doorway, remembering the first time he had seen her like this, certain even then that she would change everything about the life he thought he understood. She had been off limits in every way that mattered, forbidden by rules he had built his entire existence around, dangerous in ways neither of them had fully understood at the time. And yet, standing there watching her now, Dante understood with complete certainty that some things were worth every risk, every broken rule, every sacrifice required to keep them. Elena looked up, catching him watching her, and smiled the way she always did, warm and unguarded, and entirely without fear. Whatever danger their beginning had carried, whatever uncertain path had brought them together, they had built something real from it, something neither Salvatore Conti nor the weight of Dante's world had managed to break. She was still, in the eyes of everyone who knew his world, the one woman who should have remained entirely out of reach. And still, against every rule, every warning, every reason to stay away, the Mafia boss had never once managed to stop thinking about her, and now, finally, he never had to.